Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. We are glad to have you here with us. Episode 124, Friday, October 14th. It is definitely fall because the leaves are all coming down off the trees already after those few days of beautiful colors. Today we're going to be talking about upcoming events in the local ecosystem as well as the national ecosystem of interest to those in MedTech development and delivery. We're also going to be talking about curated FDA news. Today, 4 news items we will be talking about, and those are as follows. There is a FDA clinical cybersecurity video. FDA is turning its attention to clinicians and healthcare systems in the effort to enforce cybersecurity. As you're going to see, it is becoming sort of the Wild West. I think you will both appreciate what FDA is saying, but also kind of wonder, why does that have to be said? We'll get to that in a minute. Also, post-market surveillance guidance. If you've heard those terms, post-market surveillance, but don't really know what they mean or what the impact to your device development project might be, we're going to talk all about 522 orders from the FDA. And there's some new guidance from the agency on that. Also, labeling for LASIK. LASIK's been around for a while, but it's really interesting to see how once an industry matures, the agency is able to look more closely at what is being said or what is not being said, and to make recommendations, because it turns out there's a lot of bad stuff happening in the world of LASIK that's not getting communicated to customers. Those of us who are interested in bringing new products to market can take a lesson from this as to some of these things that need to be warned against. Speaking of warnings, there's a product out there called the DermaPen, one of many skincare products. Also a lesson in labeling. We're going to see why the FDA sent a warning letter to this company because of the types of claims they were making on their website. Now, you may not be involved in skin roller design and development, but the reality is if you're putting anything to the market that's going to be FDA regulated, you will learn from today's news item. All of these fresh news items, but first of all, upcoming events in the local and national ecosystem. First of all, from a local startup, Functional Fluidics is seeking adults ages 18 plus who have tested positive for COVID in the last 6 months. They're running a research study. So if you want to help a local company, I'm sure they would be happy to hear from you. That QR code will get you to their sign-up page. Then coming up on October 18th of this year, Miami University and BioOhio are holding a biotech forum. So again, a little bit local to the Ohio ecosystem, but since it's nearby to us, thought we would show it up here. October 18th, they're going to be having that. And that ecosystem is doing a lot of cool things. There was just a meeting down in Toledo for innovations down there about a week ago. October 19th and 20th, jumping to the other coast, Device Talks West is happening at the Santa Clara Convention Center. So that's another great medical device conference, October 19th and 20th. And then a new one that we didn't have last week, October 24th through 25th. This is really interesting for all of you researchers out there who are thinking about vision restoration. Vision restoration, what can we do with the eye? There's a co-sponsored public workshop expediting innovation of bioelectronic implants for vision restoration that is co-sponsored by the FDA and the University of Pittsburgh. So take a look at that if you're at all interested in eye research products for the eye. FDA is interested and they are trying to move that along. October 24th through 26th, I'm planning on being there. It's the MedTech conference. I know our friends over at MishBio will be there and many, many others. October 24th through 26th in Boston, Massachusetts. This is the place for medical device advocacy and meeting with folks from industry and the FDA. This is the MedTech conference powered by AdvaMed. On October 25th through 27th, it is the AI or Artificial Intelligence Summit happening in Columbus, Ohio. I just talked to somebody from Columbus the other day. They didn't know this was happening. I think it's really important to get the word around. This is a Artificial Intelligence Summit being put on by a couple of organizations, one of whom is RAPS, which is the Regulatory Affairs Society. This one is very much like its partner event happening that we'll tell you about in just a second, a few weeks later, where FDA is coming to it, and you can actually get on their calendar. You can get on the head of the combination products division. You can get on his calendar for 15 minutes. So pretty cool opportunities coming up here. October 26th. This is a new one we have for this week, brought to us from one of our folks internally who found this. This from Stat News. They're going to have a virtual event October 26th. Their marketing folks were working overtime. I love this title. Can we share health data and not be evil? But a really interesting public forum. Folks from Civitas, Merck, MITRE Corporation, Johns Hopkins, and more, talking about there does need to be health data sharing at some level, but I think today we're seeing the opportunities for abuse in this area. So a public forum on how do we really want this to work. So if you are involved in big data, if you're involved in healthcare or innovation that produces data and wants to share it around through health systems and devices, this could be a really good place to show up. That's from Stat News is putting it on. Then October 27th, Natural History Studies to Support Regenerative Medicine, a how-to webinar. If you're involved in regenerative medicine, this is another one that FDA is interested in. So they're doing this. I believe there's a academic partner involved in this as well. But for those involved in regenerative medicine, not to miss. Then November 1st, back at Ford Field, the MedHealth Summit is happening. We will be broadcasting live from that in the afternoon of November 1st. We're looking forward to that. We'll be in partnership with the Healthcare Wraps podcast, and we will be bringing you all the events there and getting to talk with some of the speakers from that event. MedHealth is a great place to show up if you find yourself in development, finance, in healthcare delivery, or in sort of payer roles. Those are the worlds being brought together here: payer, provider, developer, investor. So please join us November 1st at the MedHealth Summit. And then November 2nd through 3rd, MDNM Minneapolis. We brought this to you in previous weeks. November 7th through 8th, the joint public workshops on medical devices for opioid use. This is really cool because FDA knows that there's an opioid crisis, a lot of prescription drug abuse. So if you're starting to think about devices that can be used to combat this problem, this would probably be a good place to show up for the combating prescription drug, or specifically opioid abuse. Wow, some days your tongue just gets twangled, and this is one of those days. November 7th through 9th. This is the other one I was talking about, the Combination Products Summit. Dr. Nguyen and Weiner from the Office of Combination Products are holding office hours at this summit. So if you are registered for this summit in Columbus, November 7th through 9th, you can get 15 minutes on their calendar. You can talk with them. Again, you're probably not going to want to try to go over somebody else's heads to talk to them on a specific application, because FDA usually frowns on that. But this is a chance to talk in generalities about the kinds of challenges you may be facing, the kinds of questions that you have. What an opportunity if you're doing a combination product. November 14th through 15th. And kudos to our friends at the Weil Institute. I'm actually not clear if they are the ones sponsoring this and hosting it, or if they were just making it known. But the Data Science and AI Summit hosted by Midas. This is on the Weil Institute's website. Speaking of our friends over at the Weil Institute, I was literally handed this amazing water bottle by none other than our friend Ken Spencer when I was at Celebrate Invention the other day. So there you go. Just had to do that because Ken's a longtime listener of the show. Before we go to the next news item, I have to say, Celebrate Invention this year, absolutely amazing. The Renaissance Venture Partners on Demo Day, absolutely amazing. In-person events are back with a vengeance. Chris Ryzik, Jeff Reinvelt over at Renaissance Venture Partners. Amazing event you guys and your team put on. Kelly Sexton over at Innovation Partnerships, and all of your team and all the parts of U of M that came together for Celebrate Invention. Just incredible. I feel like we're back to in-person, and it's just really exciting to see. But here's that page for the U of M Data Science and AI Summit hosted by Midas. You can scan that from the Weil Institute there. It's being sponsored by Spark, Rocket, and a number of other groups. Then November 14th through 17th, also new this week, the Medica Trade Show. This is a place where you can go see pretty much every medical device out there. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation is doing another Michigan delegation. Into Being will be part of that, and they are going to be at Medica in Dusseldorf, Germany. So kudos to MEDC for getting the word out there about Michigan companies. There's the booth that's going to be there with kiosks for I think about 6 Michigan companies that will be in attendance. So if you have an interest in going overseas there and going to Dusseldorf, it's going to be a not to be missed event in the middle of November. Lastly, December 6th, the FDA Broad Agency Announcement Day. This is where the FDA reaches out to industry and says, here's the things we're interested in. Here's the things we would like to fund. This isn't going to FDA and asking for clearance about your device. This is working with the agency on initiatives that they want to see moved forward in order to advance regulatory science and innovation through contracting. So if you want to find out what FDA is interested in, put December 6th on your calendar. Well, that brings us next to the FDA and industry news. And before we go there, I just want to say a word of apology to our audience from last week. As I told you, our inimitable Steve was not here in the office. He was out for the afternoon. That was great. I thought I had everything under control. Just goes to show, Steve, we can't do it without you. So thank you for all that you do. I trust the audio is working better today. But that last week's recording is available on YouTube. All you got to go is to the YouTube channel, look up MedTech Crossroads, look up Into Being. You will find last week's recording. Lots of interesting news items. And one of those we're going to be sort of retouching on today because it relates to yet another news item in the world of cybersecurity. And that's actually the first one that we're going to be talking about here. This FDA clinical cybersecurity video. Now, if you recall last week, we were talking about a device from Medtronic, a insulin pump that unfortunately is hackable. Now, it's not hackable through the internet like some kind of a James Bond movie, but it is hackable under situations that are not unforeseeable. The upshot of that is that the extra bolus mode that allows a user to inject an extra bolus of insulin could become hijacked. That means the device can't be trusted all the time to inject the right amount of insulin. And as you might well guess, that could be harmful or even fatal to a user. So there are workarounds for that Medtronic device. But this brings up the larger question of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity featured heavily at the recent Renaissance on Demo Day, definitely a topic of interest. And it certainly caught FDA's eye. This rather short video that you can reach through that QR code, hosted by Dr. Michelle Tarver from FDA. She does a very nice walkthrough talking about clinical cybersecurity. So her focus here isn't us as developers over at Into Being or the startup down the road that's making a connected medical device or the researchers working on clinical or on cybersecurity, her target is the clinicians. Her target is the hospital systems. But I think we as a community that comes before the clinic or involves the clinic ought to be thinking really hard about what Dr. Tarver is saying in this video, and I'll cover what she talks about here in just a second. Because this has really become the Wild West. It turns out that FDA is trying in good faith to stem some problems that really shouldn't exist, but nevertheless they do. Here are some of the things she says in the video, or the thought process that Dr. Tarver walks us through. She asks clinicians to think about the intersection of cybersecurity with device function. In other words, hey clinician, hey hospital system, think about where the functions of the enabled devices, the web-enabled devices, the mobile devices, whatever they may be, that you are offering to patients, think about where their function intersects their vulnerability, basically. Okay, that's not entirely an unreasonable thing to ask clinicians to think about, but it might raise a flag in your head. She then says, you should take an inventory of your connected devices that do connect to the internet for their function. Well, that's probably a good practice for any institution that has systems that are interconnected and do things. Know what those are, know how they're interconnected. So we certainly can't falter for reminding people of that step to take. She mentions access paths, especially through mobile devices. What are ways that data could be transferred in ways that you didn't expect? And this goes beyond HIPAA to control of devices and things like that. Then she says health, privacy, and safety considerations. Clinicians and hospital systems, please consider health, privacy, and safety considerations of your connected devices. And if you're like me at this point in the video, you start to wonder to yourself, why is this the responsibility of the clinician? It goes on from there. She starts to give clinicians advice to advise their patients that if there's things they wonder about, to go and ask the manufacturer of the connected devices. Hey manufacturer, how does this device update? What kinds of connections can it make? What happens if the device has a broken connection to the internet? What are the risks associated with the device? Again, if you're like me, you're probably wondering, why is this the patient's business? Isn't this something that we as an industry should be delivering safe devices to the patient? And most patients aren't going to understand how to ask about ports and security layers and what happens if my device disconnects from the internet. So while this is meant in good faith and certainly is a good warning to the industry, this does seem to go beyond the level that most providers and patients are going to have the interest or the expertise to track down a manufacturer and start asking questions about cybersecurity. After that, there's the advice that practitioners should escalate their concerns through the healthcare system that they work for. And while that's certainly a recommendable thing, by this point in the video, it's pretty clear that what the FDA is recognizing and trying to stem off is the reality that we're kind of in the Wild West with respect to cybersecurity and medical devices. They're tacitly acknowledging that there are vulnerabilities in devices that are not being addressed and asking the community to be vigilant about them. And that is a good thing. They also have in the video advice on talking with patients about cybersecurity. But that advice doesn't go much beyond saying, follow all the rules and make sure your device is updated, and as a practitioner, listen to what I tell you. So again, kudos to the agency for trying to raise the alarm. It does seem, though, like we're talking about a bigger issue here. We're talking about cybersecurity of medical devices, which, as last week we reported, is something that's hitting even the big manufacturers like Medtronic, vulnerabilities in devices. And these appear to be widespread enough and systemic enough that the agency is having to warn clinicians, we can't really fix this right away. You need to be vigilant. And it does raise the question in my mind, and as we like to think here at Into Being, about 14971. It's the International Standard for Risk Analysis. And there are risks presented to patients by medical devices. And in this connected world, cybersecurity presents risks to patients. How is it that as developers and as regulators, these are making it through? This is certainly a place for good new thinking and things that people should be addressing. But I just like to remind folks that risk analysis should involve analysis of cybersecurity risks for a medical device. And as always, as you've heard us say on the show many, many times, if you're designing an electronic and software-controlled medical device, you want to do as much of your risk mitigation in hardware as you possibly can, and it's precisely for reasons like this. So stay tuned. I'm sure this is not done at all. We haven't heard the last of cybersecurity risks and concerns in the world of medical devices. To our next news item, you've heard this from us before, but 510K is halfway. It's something that we like it Into Being to tell our clients. It's something that you should recognize, that if you're developing a medical device, either as a startup, a product development effort, an investor, getting your clearance is usually about half of the process. Well, unless you need what is called post-market surveillance, in which case there's even more. What we're going to talk about next, this news item, new from FDA, released October 7th, the final guidance on post-market surveillance under Section 522. I know I sound unreasonably excited about that, but it actually is very, very interesting. There is the opportunity to, for certain questions, not answer them pre-market. And to anyone trying to get a device cleared, that can be good news. If you want to go to this guidance, scan the QR code. It'll take you right to it. But Section 522 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act authorizes the FDA to require post-market surveillance in the following instances. First of all, let's just address what is post-market surveillance. Well, you're well aware that testing or clinical trials could be required before your device goes to market, and that's appropriate. But what about aftermarket? Is it true that all the questions around safety and efficacy have been answered by your submission? Certainly not. But are there questions that rise to a level that the agency wants to stay involved in your product and in its ongoing process through the market with patients? And they say, yes, there are places where we want to. They have a mechanism, which is a Section 522 order, which if you haven't heard about and you're planning product development, just keep in mind, if some of the reasons that I'm about to talk about hit, you could find yourself in a situation where you need to plan not only for your development and your clearance and your manufacturing ramp up and your quality system ramp up, but also your Section 522 compliance. Let's see what some of these examples are. If you have a Class 2 or a Class 3 device for which failure of the device would be reasonably likely to have a serious adverse health consequence, FDA can require post-market surveillance. Sounds reasonable. How about this? A Class 2 or Class 3 device expected to have a significant use in pediatric populations. In other words, if it can hurt you really badly, or if it's going to be used significantly with kids, FDA might want you to look at it in an ongoing basis after your market clearance. The third one, a Class 2 or Class 3 device that's intended to be implanted in the human body for over 1 year. So if you have a more than 1 year implant, be ready that you could have a Section 522 order for post-market surveillance. We're going to talk in a minute about not so much the cost of that, because that's going to depend on your product, but we're going to talk about the timelines for that. How long might you be under a Section 522 order? And finally, number 4, a Class 2 or Class 3 device that's intended to be life-sustaining or life-supporting outside a device user facility. So if you're in a device user facility, if you're in a hospital or something like that, you might not need post-market surveillance. But what if there's life-sustaining or life-supporting functions that aren't being monitored by a healthcare practitioner on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis? FDA might want to see post-market surveillance. Now, none of those seem like unreasonable asks, but let's see what kinds of things FDA might be asking in your post-market surveillance. They might want to better understand the nature, severity, or frequency of suspected problems reported in adverse event reports. So if we think something might go wrong with the device type, we'll be tracking it. We'd like to get better data about what we thought might be an issue. To obtain more information on device performance associated with real-world clinical practice. So in other words, if we want to just really see if these devices do what they're advertised to do, under the justifications mentioned on the last slide. You can't just do it for no justification, FDA. But if you have a justification, FDA can request this because they want to monitor device performance. They want to see if the devices do what they are stated to do. The next one, a little bit longer, address long-term or infrequent safety and effectiveness issues for implantable and other devices for which the pre-market testing provided more limited information. They give an example. Pre-market evaluation of a device may have been based on surrogate markers, markers that weren't the real things that you were looking at. They were surrogate markers. Once the device is actually marketed, post-market surveillance may be appropriate to assess the effectiveness of the device in detecting or treating the disease or condition, rather than the surrogate. So they might be looking at malfunction or failure of a device intended for long-term use, or incidents of later things resulting from device use. So you can tell they're looking at problems, studying problems they think might be there. They're studying device efficacy. They're saying you got your clearance based on something that wasn't the actual data to be acted on. And then lastly, to better define the association between problems and devices when unexpected or unexplained serious adverse events occur after a device is marketed. So did the type of adverse events change? And we've heard before, especially the more intelligent devices become, the more chance of them failing in ways that weren't part of their clearance. And so that's a very, very important thing for FDA to be able to look at. There's a few additional considerations that FDA mentions in this document. And it's a long document, so I encourage you to, if you're interested in this, follow the QR code on the first slide of this section. But they mention that pediatric devices are not exclusive to pediatric patients. So that sounds like an oxymoron or something that's not quite right there. What they mean is this. There are a lot of devices that are used on pediatric populations, even though pediatric populations are not their only intended population. And so the agency is saying if your device is likely to be used on peds, even if that's not the exclusive population of use, watch out, we might require post-market surveillance. They also talk about timelines for study compliance. And if you're putting this into your company's timeline, I think you might want to think about what these timelines are. They are recommending from the date of issuance of the 522 order, which could easily come when you're getting the clearance for your other device, or for your device. The study must have commenced within 15 months post-market. 20% of your subjects have to be enrolled within 18 months. 50% of your subjects have to be enrolled within 21 months, and 100% of your subjects have to be enrolled within 2 years. It's not clear that this is binding guidance, but it is worth knowing that this is likely to be a study that you could take this one of two ways, that you either have to or only have 2 years to complete. There's also a number of things relating to study design that FDA has in this document that are beyond the scope of our little report on it here. But they talk about study design and also the types of studies that can be done. They have things like a randomized clinical trial, a prospective cohort study, a retrospective cohort study, a cross-sectional study, enhanced surveillance, active surveillance, the list goes on, a meta-analysis, prospective and retrospective study, case control study. The point is that there's a bunch of ways that this post-market surveillance can occur. So don't assume that the form of it is all fixed and it's not up for debate. They do have quite a few different ways that this can be approached, but understand it's an order that they can give, so that even though you thought you were done with your device development, you thought you were done with your clearance, you got your quality system in place, you launched the device to the market, and you're taking over the world, FDA could still put this legal burden on you to conduct a 522 study of your device. Now, when you discuss with them the plan, they can say it's not acceptable, they can approve it, they can give you a deficiency or a disapproval. The only reason for putting this up here now is to help you understand that this is something that rises almost to the level of another clearance. The agreement on this study is just about as important as the agreement on a study that you were doing to get your initial market clearance. So please don't see this as something that is a small incidental that has to be done. This reminds us very much of the sorts of things that have to be done pre-clearance. Now, when it comes time for the report, after the completion, I believe you have 60 days to get them a report. They can say the report's on time, the report is overdue, the report is received, and they will get back to you and say it's acceptable or not. But we thought this is actually relatively important to be aware of, that these 522 orders with this clarified guidance from FDA, recently final, not draft guidance, will become a very important part of your device development plan. Because if you fall into one of those categories we talked about, and I'll just show you again here really quick, because I think this is the most important slide in the whole thing. If you have reasonable likelihood, not just for class 3 devices, but also for class 2 devices, that device failure could have a serious adverse health consequence, that the device, regardless of its intended use, could have a significant use in pediatric populations, that if it's implanted in the body for more than 1 year, and if it's life-sustaining or life-supporting outside of a device user facility, think a hospital. If it's usable outside of that for life-sustaining or life-supporting use, you should really be ready for the possibility of a 522 post-market surveillance study to be completed. Well, as you know, we don't talk about specific niches unless those specific niches teach us about something more generally. So today I'm going to take you to the world of LASIK. Lasers. Eye lasers. They've been around for a while, and of course they replaced earlier methods of correction which were mechanical based. But in the world of LASIK, there is a draft guidance out, patient labeling recommendations. Now this surprised me a little bit, because I think what we're dealing with is an industry that has taken off, that is mature, and that's hurting people. So FDA now has the data to be able to say, hey, LASIK manufacturers, this is what you should be saying in your labeling. Of course, as you've heard us say before, labeling includes what is said on your website, what's said at your trade shows, what's said by your sales agents, what is said also in what is included with the device. It's the claims you make and the warnings that you make about the device, and it's the warnings that are the focus here by the agency. They say in their draft guidance, LASIK is currently one of the 43 most commonly performed elective procedures in the world, as well as the most popular form of 44 refractive surgery. I'm sorry, forget the 44 and 45. I apologize, that is a typo right there, folks. I'm just going to own it. 43, 44, and 45 are not part of the text. Let me try that again. LASIK is currently one of the most commonly performed elective procedures in the world, as well as the most popular form of refractive surgery that patients choose to correct common vision problems, such as nearsightedness, farsightedness, and astigmatism. Same apology here. Since the time of the LASIK Advisory Committee meeting, FDA has continued to gather information pertaining to risks associated with LASIK, including dry eye, pain and discomfort, and visual symptoms. The agency recommends that manufacturers talk about what is LASIK, what is the device used for the patient's procedure, what are the approved indications for use specific to the LASIK device, what makes someone a poor candidate for LASIK, what factors should a patient consider in deciding whether LASIK is appropriate, what are the benefits, risks, and alternatives, and what should a patient expect before, during, and after LASIK. Now it's really interesting because in this guidance, FDA is going so far as to communicate pictures, glare. This is what you could expect LASIK-induced glare to look like. Wow. If I knew that there was a chance of that, would I rush as quickly to this as I might otherwise? Well, maybe or maybe not. But this is what they're trying to communicate. This is an example from the FDA's guidance, draft guidance, what no glare would look like from a backlit window, and what it might look like if LASIK leaves you with severe glare. Here's the idea of a halo. No halo on the left, and a severe halo on the right. Starburst is apparently another risk of LASIK. Cars look like that on the left, and they could look like that on the right after the procedure. Double vision. The dog looks pretty clear on the left and looks like it's sort of shaking on the right. Now, will this happen every time? No, of course not. But this is what the FDA says. They actually have the recommendation that a consent form be created. And I've selected some elements of that consent form here, saying things like, I recognize that 1 week following surgery, up to 85% of patients experience dry eye symptoms. At 6 months following surgery, up to 27% of patients experience dry eye symptoms. 41% of patients may experience the symptoms that we were just showing on the previous slides. And then 4% with other symptoms, lots of difficulty, or quote, so much difficulty that I can no longer do some of my usual activities. That's about 2% of the LASIK population. So you can see why FDA is concerned about this. They have gotten enough data on this industry that they are recognizing that some surgeries are being performed without enough clarity to the patients, who are then surprised by the adverse events that they experience after the fact. And so this is an example of a mature industry where the agency is able to roll out this kind of guidance to warn people against the challenges that they are seeing on a regular basis. How does this affect those who are new to delivery of care? Well, for us that are developing new technologies, you're not going to have this kind of data. All you can do is do your best, like we talked about in a previous element. Think about your risk analysis, do your best, and there may be a reason for, that was our second news item, post-market surveillance, in order to watch how people respond to your product. That's as far as the responsibility of a new device can really go. But as a market matures, you'll find that data starts to come back. This has happened in many industries, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation being one that comes to mind as a recent challenge where FDA had to step in and give guidance. And it looks like LASIK is getting a similar type of treatment, where the recognition of the risks is coming out and the agency is taking steps to warn patients through the device manufacturers. And finally today, the Dermapen warning letter. This you can get to through the QR code. We're not going to belabor the company involved, but really this is a very, very common type of problem where a company goes out there and they make claims. They might make them on Amazon, they might make them on their website, but nevertheless they make claims. And in this particular instance, some of the claims look like this. Can help to lighten the appearance of hyperpigmentation. What we're talking about here is a microneedle roller, a microneedle tool that's used to effectively perforate the skin. Now, whether you think that's a good idea or not, devices like this are all over the place. You will find them all over the place. And they're being marketed frequently not as medical devices. But a company comes along and makes this claim. It can help to lighten the appearance of hyperpigmentation. Or to say this, use the pen on your face or body to reduce the appearance of acne scars, fine lines, wrinkles, and stretch marks. You can even use it on your scalp to stimulate hair growth. We suggest using it to treat stretch marks with this other product. The single needle tip allows precise treatment of deep lines or wrinkles. Or this statement, which really lights it up. What makes this pen stand apart from the rest is the adjustable needle head, varying in length from 0.25 millimeters to 2 millimeters, and the built-in vibration mechanism that provides deeper needle penetration. FDA says this in response. And here's the reason I want you to pay attention to this. If you're involved in new product development, if you're looking at getting through the FDA, or if you're trying to skirt around FDA clearance processes, here's the warning. FDA says, claims or statements of penetration or some effect beyond the stratum corneum into living layers of skin by such products show an intent to affect the structure or function of the body. Now, you may not be marketing a dermal roller or pen, but the reality is this statement should hit close to home for anybody involved in the delivery of a product to the medical device market. What is a medical device? We've covered it before, but we'll cover it again here. And why is it that when the FDA says an intent to affect the structure or function of the body, that we wake up and pay attention? It's because of this, and you can get to this page on the FDA's website through the QR code. A medical device is recognized in the official national formulary or the United States Pharmacopoeia or any supplement to them. That is, there are definitions of drugs in things like the formulary and the pharmacopoeia. There are also defined generic medical devices. For example, you may not know that an eyedropper is actually defined in one of these two documents. So as a result, a medical device might be one of these tools that's defined in the formulary or the pharmacopoeia. B, intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. Okay, so if you're diagnosing or treating or preventing disease, that's going to make you a medical device. But get this one. This is one we often don't pay attention to. C, intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals, and which does not achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action within or on the body, And it's not through metabolism, as it says later in that paragraph. That would make it a drug if it were being metabolized or working through chemical action. But if it's intended to affect the structure or function of the body, watch out. And by claiming that you can adjust these needles to make them longer and get deep into the skin, FDA says that is de facto evidence that you are trying to affect the structure or function of the body. Could your device that you don't want to be thought of as a medical device fall prey to this? It's entirely possible. And so it just means you've got to look careful at these things, try to understand what the FDA is actually looking for, and be sure to steer around it. We've certainly heard from a lot of these. We reported a few weeks ago how Amazon had got a warning letter from the agency for a number of products that it allows folks to market through it. And so this is just the agency cracking down on misbranded or adulterated devices. Well, just a quick review of our news that we covered today. FDA's take on clinical cybersecurity, really, really important. Post-market surveillance guidance, LASIK labeling guidance, and the Dermapen warning letter. All good stuff to cover here in the news. That brings us to a point where if there are any questions, we'd be happy to take those. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. We'll give just a few moments for that. And as we wait there, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm going to thank you for being here with us on MedTech Crossroads today. We'll look forward to seeing you next week as we bring you all the most fresh FDA news and local events. We'll talk to you soon.